Little Horse and Big Conversation. Welcome to Little Horse and Big Conversation, where we give them their say, let the horse guide the way. Here at Little Horse and Big Conversation, we have the choice, so let's give them a voice. Here at Little Horse and Big Conversation, Little Horse and Big Conversation.
Hello and welcome back to this next episode of the Little Horse Big Conversation podcast. You are here once again with me, Amy Mitchell, and my co-host, as ever, Ross Cooper. Thank you very much for joining us again for another episode. Today we're going to be talking about pain, pain in horses, and it's going to be a bit of a broad-ranging conversation about some of the science behind it, what actually is it, the mechanisms, and then getting into some good old ethical discussion.
We love an ethical discussion.
We love an ethical discussion. So I'm going to hand straight over to Ross because he's going to do some of the sciencey stuff.
I was hoping
I'll chip in.
I was hoping you wasn't going to call me Mr. Science again because I feel like I need a t-shirt.
Be arranged.
You'll just find me on the back of a cereal box. So, before we start talking a little bit more in depth about pain, it's going to be really beneficial for us all to have a little bit more of an insight as to what pain actually is. Now, if we look at the definition given by the International Association of the Study of Pain back in 2004, pain is summarised as an unpleasant sensory or emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage. So what I want everyone to be super aware of there is that we're looking at sensory and emotional experience, because we talk quite a lot about the sensory aspects, but we don't really dive too much into the emotional experience that we as humans or our horses, animals may have. So pain is considered in three different components. So we have a sensory discriminatory component, which is effectively a where, what and how. We have an affective component, which represents the emotional, unpleasant and effectively the feelings associated with pain. And then we have our evaluative, which is the magnitude and how it presents itself. So is it stabbing? Is it pounding? Is it mild? Or is it severe? And with pain, depending who we speak to, we have a couple of different ways of how we may classify pain. So acute pain and chronic pain, for example, generally that's defined and acknowledged within the length of time that pain has been present. So 3 months is generally the cut-off between class as acute, moving forward to chronic. And what's interesting about chronic is that it is less responsive to intervention and analgesics. It usually takes a lot longer to respond than if acute pain was present. When we talk about pain, we need to remember that pain is an adaptive response. It serves a purpose. So we don't want to not have any pain because that is our body's way of letting us know that there is an issue. But if it continues, it can become maladaptive when it persists. So we want to be as hot on our horses' signs and signals if they are in pain as much as we possibly can. And what causes pain are little things called nociceptors. So these are specialized nerve endings located throughout the skin, deep tissues, muscle, fascia, and organs that detect harmful or potentially damaging stimuli. I think Amy should take over because I need a breather after all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing is for me, when I first started looking at pain, it was that kind of understanding of the fact that it's the body's warning system that tissue is being damaged or has the potential to be damaged. And it's kind of, when you think about it, it sounds obvious. But I think it's something that we often ignore, that it really is there as a warning sign. And and that, you kind of ignore it at your peril. And I know I, as a human, because of the nature of the work that I do and the nature of the personality that I have, I'm not very good at listening to signs like pain signs in my own body. And know that, that it can lead to bigger problems. And then I think probably some of the things that we're going to talk about a bit later. There's then this thing of if you cover the pain up, are you causing potentially more damage? Are you causing the problem to move elsewhere because of compensations? It's you can very quickly start to get into these kind of ethical considerations as soon as you start looking at pain, and particularly when you're looking at pain in your horses, because a horse that's lame, that's obviously lame, is quite easy to identify. But a horse that is in pain elsewhere in the body is not necessarily that easy to identify if you don't know what you're looking for.
Visual
And
pain is a great one.
absolutely. Yeah. And I was listening to a podcast recently, and it's annoying me. I can't remember the lady's name because she was amazing. A lady vet in America. Anyway, I'll come back to that when I do remember her name. But she was talking about body lameness, which I thought was a really interesting concept. Of like, we talk about lameness, and you immediately think of a horse, being sore in a limb. But I was thinking this concept of body lameness actually is really interesting because there is so much more to the body than just the legs. And it's that those issues that are going off in other parts of the body that are less easy to identify, I think.
So a lot of the time people will say that a horse has got a lame limb, but the horse is lame. The horse as a whole is lame
Yeah.
because, the pain is potentially localized, but it's not going to stay isolated because of the body working as one.
Yeah, absolutely. Example, I have a recurring problem with my right shoulder, which for the most of the part is fine. But occasionally something will happen and it flares up. And as a result, I also end up with quite a lot of pain in my neck. Because I'm holding my head differently, because I'm moving differently, because I'm creating tension patterns in other parts of my body in order to compensate for the fact that my shoulder hurts. And it's exactly the same, for horses. But we can't say to the horse, "Oh, is your neck a bit sore?" It's we've got that responsibility to try and see what's happening.
Yeah. And I think we don't have, as humans generally, I don't think we've got a particularly great eye
No.
for being able to see pain in other animals. And pain is such an individual experience, which is something which I think a lot of the time gets overlooked.
Yeah.
It's very subjective. It's not just how it feels, it's how it makes you feel. But like you were saying, our interpretation and experience of pain is going to give us a bias on how we perceive the pain and how we then interpret pain in others. I remember, I think it was last year or the year before? I think it was the year before. I was at a scoping for a horse that I see, and he was noticeably showing signs of discomfort. So it was a case of a little bit of process of elimination, but from how he was presenting physically and behaviorally, I was wondering if there was something going off within his gut in terms of ulceration. And it turns out he scoped grade 2, but he was just into the grade 2 margin. And the vet doing the scoping actually turned around and said, "Oh, they won't be causing him a problem because there's no pain receptors in the gut." And I'm just there like, I didn't say anything, but I obviously
Mm,
had a chat with my clients afterwards. And like, no, there are nociceptors present in the gut,
mm,
and it's not for us to dictate whether a horse is in pain or not,
no,
because it is so subjective.
absolutely.
And they're big animals, and like you were saying, it's figuring out where that is coming from within the body, and then the compensatory effect that it is going to have within the tissues as a whole. Because
Yeah,
it's not just the tissues that are affected. I mean, where do we where do we sense pain? The brain.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's yeah, and as you say, so just going back to a point you made a couple of minutes ago that we're not very good at recognizing pain in horses. I think we will in the notes there'll be some references. There's been some really excellent research done by different people into this. So, for example, Sue Dyson's ridden pain ethogram. So the plan with this podcast is we're not going to. I mean, we'll probably touch on it from time to time, but we're not going to be going into great detail about the ways to see pain in horses. But there will be a list in the show notes of some really useful resources that you can look at that will help with that. But it's that whole thing of it's not always like so I think your immediate thought is pain like it's going to be something dramatic and obvious, but it's not always. It can be kind of quiet and subtle, and easy to explain away and easy for us to normalize behaviors, and to try and train through things that we're seeing as behavioral
Mm.
that actually is the horse showing that it's in pain. And it's not always, it's not always easy to know the answer. Like, how many times have I had a conversation with a client saying, I wish we could just have a conversation and ask him how he's feeling. Like, how is this for you? But we don't have that. So we have to take our responsibility, I think, really seriously.
Hmm. Especially as professionals as well,
Yeah.
because you get quite a large number, and again, there's always grace with this because you don't know what you know until you know it.
No.
But the information is out there, so if you want to seek it, it's accessible.
Yeah.
And just because an animal will do a behavior does not mean there is an absence of pain.
No, absolutely.
And just because you haven't been able to detect pain in a lameness workup or, within veterinary diagnostics, it does not rule out pain,
No.
which is quite tricky because I've been in situations before where I can behaviorally see that the horse is not right. I can feel
Mm.
it through my entire body. I can pick up on it in places where you brought it to, you bring that into the conversation, people would probably raise an eyebrow at you. But you can see it in their body in subtle ways. But because there
Yeah.
has been one, two, three diagnostics done, but there is nothing showing up, it means the horse is fine when the horse isn't fine.
Yeah.
Within situations like this, it is very hard for an owner to be told and given conflicting advice in situations like this.
Yeah. I'm sure we can both clearly think of examples of that. I mean, I've had clients previously where it's been very obvious to me that the horse is in pain. Um, but that the vet has said, it's fine, we'll inject this, carry on. And to
Mm,
me, I feel quite uncomfortable with that, because I can see the horse is in pain. And I will say, not sure I agree with that, but it's vet led.
yeah.
And I think sometimes I think that kind of leads quite nicely into like the cognitive dissonance thing that can be there. And I'm not meaning this, I don't mean that to be in any way offensive to people, but it's a thing and we all have it. So, certainly the people that I work with all definitely love their horses, really love their horses. But sometimes people also, it's an interesting one. We had Donna Blinman talking to the students a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that she brought up in conversation that I've thought about quite a lot since is that when she has somebody bring their horse to her for the first time for a bodywork treatment, the first thing she says to the person is, "So why did you get a horse? What was, what made you want to get this? Why did you buy this horse?" And actually seeing that and being able to understand what that person's initial motivation was can be really interesting, because horses are a big investment financially, emotionally. Quite often as horse owners, it's a big part of our identity. Often we have goals and things that we want to do with that horse, which is all tied into our identity and who other people see us as. And it can be really hard sometimes, I think, particularly if you've got a horse, so like my Jasmine, for example, she's not stoic. My Jazz. If there's something wrong with Jasmine, we all know about it.
Yes.
Which is great, because there's no questioning with Jasmine. It's like she's either fine or she isn't, and we all know if she isn't, which makes things easy. But you've then got your quiet horses that will kind of go along to get along. And it can be hard to see that the horse is showing signs of things if that really disrupts what you want to be true for your life. And that's the difficult thing. And as I feel like we as professionals need to find ways to be able to kind of support owners with that without alienating them.
Yes.
And sometimes, I've got a student of mine at the moment who has got this lovely warm blood mare that she got with plans of doing competition work and so on with, that the horse has not really been sound enough to do that from the time that she first got her. And she said she's now kind of reached the point where she's just kind of, all of that she's put aside, and she's now like, I just want the horse to be happy and comfortable. But that's quite there can be some grief attached to that. You're letting go of a dream and an identity and things that you wanted to do. And that can be hard.
I think this links into something that you said in the Ridden Agenda podcast we did.
Yeah.
About changing your trajectory and letting go of old identities to something which is present in the now.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes once, I know, I mean, having done it myself, it can feel that as you're going through that mindset change, and it can be painful. But actually for me, having come, when you come out the other side of it, actually, it's like a big weight's been taken off. And I've personally ended up, I think, with a much deeper connection with my horses from letting go of the expectations. And I mean, a lot of things have changed for me. So it's not just that, like the whole way that I do things, the whole way I look at things has all changed. But it's all been part and parcel of the same thing. But I think it's a difficult one, when we've got, as you say, the quiet horse, the horse that internalizes things, that there is no immediately identifiable problem, but you've still got that feeling that something isn't right. At what point are we actually rewarding that horse for suppressing pain, for suppressing discomfort?
Mm. And I think it's quite interesting because we talk a lot about when we think about horses in pain or in discomfort, we are shown quite a lot of the time or spoken to a lot of the time about actually what do we look for
Mm.
within pain,
Hmm.
within lameness, within discomfort, but we aren't presented very often with good presentation of what we're looking for in a healthy horse.
Yeah, yeah, very true. Very true. Tell
So
us, Ross, what are we looking for in a healthy horse?
and I
Segue.
I think we don't check in on our horses enough, do we? And I say that quite generalistic. I know there are many of us that do, but I think the vast majority of the equine community don't, in terms of how often do you look at movement? How often do you get to know your horse's body intimately, in the
Hmm.
sense of how do their muscles feel? What are their limb
Yeah.
flexions like? What does their posture present? All of these little things that we can do on a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis, things that give us indicators or allow us to see indicators of change. Because what does a healthy horse look like? Because a lot of the time we get told and shown what is negative, what needs to be improved, but we don't really have a lot of information out there in terms of what we're contrasting that to. So, in terms of what we're looking for in a healthy horse, we're looking for a horse that is capable of showing positive social behaviors. Okay, so a horse that is capable of relaxing, interacting socially with other horses, which, will include mutual grooming, dozing, that will also blend in to positive behaviors around humans. So we're also wanting to ensure that our horse is comfortable sleeping, lying down, standing up, good healthy locking mechanism of the stifle, that they're happy exploring their environment. So we want our horses to be showing an openness to the world around them, not hypervigilance, but showing a curiosity, an interest, be alert but regulated. And in terms of movement, we want freedom of movement. We want regular rhythmical movement. Okay. And it's always, what we always need to consider is we're looking at our horses as the individuals within the environment that we keep them. Because the expression of normal behavior for a horse may be different in certain domestic settings than it will be in others. In the sense that if we're classing, it's not really viable to observe horses in a natural environment, because there may be changes as a result of domestic management. So their expression, that repertoire of behaviour and that behavioural expression, will be dictated by the environment that they're in. Okay. So in contrast, we will be then looking at how to spot the signs if a horse might be starting to showcase some signs that there is discomfort present. Okay. So movements that look different to what your horse's movement to be. This could be stiffer, this could be slower, they could be more cautious over different gradients, different terrain. Behaviours may happen more often or less. They could be more intermittent or more unpredictable. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't, which I know a lot of people struggle with in terms of when behaviours show up in certain situations and then they don't show up in others. So that could be because there is a pain-related factor present. Actions may be slower or more careful. So as we've said, in terms of being more cautious, you might find that they may be slower on transitions. They may be slower in certain gaits. They may be slightly stiff. They might not want to do some things for as long in terms of lying down, playing, interaction. There could be changes in reaction time, changes within how they interact. They might withdraw from interaction, and there may be reduced activity and lethargy. So, there is a lot to sort of look for within the changes that you might see. And the most important things to look for are subtle changes in facial expression, posture, and movement patterns, because this all helps us and lead us towards identifying discomfort before it becomes, not before it becomes an issue, but before our horse presents behavior that before. So what we're doing here is we're looking for whispers. We're looking for the subtle communications and signals that help us identify that our horse is emotionally or sensory not feeling great, and we're trying to help identify the cause of this within that whisper before our horse feels the need to start shouting, which a lot of the time, as we've said, we can be quite poor overall at recognizing these smaller signals, and we don't realize there is a problem until there is a problem.
Yeah.
I could list 30 plus behaviors, but that's going to be a bit exhaustive. So like Amy says, we're going to be giving you some references such as the Sue Dyson Pain Ethogram to look into, but there are also the Horse Grimace Scale by Dallacosta and the Equine Pain Face by Karina Glierup. So they're always really good to look into because the subtleties of pain start with facial expression. And that's something that we are horrifically bad at noticing. So horses will display specific facial expressions when they are in pain. So learning to identify these cues can be really, really helpful in catching pain before it becomes too much of a chronic issue. And there's going to be other things that we'll be able to see. You know, we'll see changes in posture. So a horse can present camped under. They may want to push weight onto the front end. They may have a short and choppy stride. They may stumble more. You know, changes can be subtle, like we've just started talking about, or changes can be more obvious. So all of these compensatory patterns that present posturally are going to have a knock-on effect on the rest of the horse's physiology as well. You know, there's going to be increased strain on hooves, there's going to be increased strain on ligaments. So it's, you know, the consequences for pain being localized, air quote, are going to be far-reaching throughout the rest of the body. So just going back to the indicators that we may see, so we might see something along the lines of orbital tightening. So you might get triangulation, so those little wrinkles above your horse's eye. You'll see an overall tightening and tension on the facial muscles. You may get prominently strained cheek muscles. So again, that interlinks to the tension that you might see. So, you know, on the side of the jaw, that's where you'll see some straining. You may also see the lips being pressed together, contracted chin, nostrils flared outwards, how horses hold their ears as well. They are always super telling of how our horse is feeling internally. So, you know, are they turned backwards? Are they held stiffly? So we've got all of these little signs which show up before we get more explosive, more obvious behaviors, because like we are saying multiple times today, there are things that we miss and we don't notice there is a problem until there is a problem. And that's a lot of the time because we aren't taught to recognize behavioral signs of pain. You know, it's far reaching, it's context specific, and pain is quite a complex thing to be able to work effectively through. But behavior is going to be one of the first things that changes and is an early indicator of underlying health issues. You know, behavioral change is our earliest indicator that something is wrong.
Yeah.
Your horse isn't just behaving in a way which you don't like for the sake of it. They are doing it because they are trying to communicate. That is what behavior is. It is communication. We don't need to be taking it personally, especially if it's quite acute. But again, when changes become more chronic or progressive, we don't always see it. And that can be, like you've said earlier on, that can be something that can be actually slightly harder because it's crept up and we've not noticed.
Yeah.
Just building on that with postural presentation, we can see a lot of dysfunction in posture because of environments, the way that we train. It's not always horse-centered and for their body. So a lot of the time dysfunction might be present, but it doesn't necessarily mean that pain is present. There is a relationship between the two, so pathology will start to arise as part of dysfunction, which will then cause pain. So again, a lot of it is about training your eye. Recognizing if your horse is moving appropriately, what their body should be doing, if there's muscle atrophy, if there's hypertrophy, looking what correct biomechanics and movement can look like is a great way to start integrating a horse-centered approach to training into your work, into your management of horses, ways to help them strengthen. Because if you can recognize dysfunction early, you can most certainly, just like with people, we can ward off pathology that might arise later down the line.
Or sometimes I think on the same sort of thing, like you'll talk to someone, I don't know, taking a trimming example, a horse being quite snatchy with one of its hind feet. And to me, that's a sign that something's not comfortable. Could be a whole range of things, but it's a sign that something's not comfortable. And we'll say to the owner, that's what's happening there, and that they'll say, oh, he's always done that. It's just him being a bit of a knob or whatever. Oh, it's just how he is. And when it's your own horse and you're seeing that same behavior repeatedly, day after day, week after week, etc., and that there doesn't seem on the face of it to be anything else that is obvious to you, it can be really easy just to put that down to a personality trait of the horse when, in fact, it's not. And you can very easily go down a well of doom looking at reels, etc., on social media of horses displaying quite dramatic behaviors that the person sharing it is saying, oh, look, he's, this is a behavioral thing, when it's very clear as an outsider that it's absolutely not. So it's difficult to do. But being able to sometimes just kind of step back and look at something and say, okay, so this isn't in inverted commas, normal behavior for a horse. It might have become normal for him because he's done it for such a long time, but why is it become normal for him? I've sometimes had horses that I've been trimming for quite a long time, that have suddenly changed the work that they're doing or had a new body worker that's done something differently, and suddenly that snatching behavior has completely gone. It's like, well, that's interesting.
Very. Yeah.
But on the flip side, and this has just come to me, this wasn't in my preparation notes, but it was something that I was just thinking about. There are sometimes owners who will see things that aren't there. There is a thing that I refer to as Munchausen's by pony.
I love that.
Which, I think the owner is constantly looking for a problem when there isn't one. Which I think almost creates a problem in the horse, because I think the horse starts to reflect that back at you.
Yes. And it's quite interesting how this may lead back to what we initially said at the start of the episode about individual perception of pain.
Yeah.
That's someone who maybe, so in contrast to what you were saying earlier, I think I'm quite sensitive to...
No, do you?
Has that never come across? Oh, shit, man.
If of all the things I would ever describe you as, Ross, sensitive is definitely not one of them.
Okay, well, I don't know what to say to that.
Sorry, I've just totally thrown you off your vibe there. Carry on.
I have. I feel like you've just took me off my train of thought and put me on the banter wagon now. So it's interesting how someone maybe someone's perception of pain may create more hyper awareness or hyper vigilant of others being in pain,
Mm,
be that people or animals,
yeah,
and that relatability, so to speak.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that yeah, that whole perception thing is massive, isn't it? Like, and
Mm.
we can never understand another person or another animal's perception of pain because it is so subjective to all of us.
Yes.
And it's easy, I think, you know, if you're someone who's quite got a high threshold to be dismissive of another person's stroke, another being's experience of pain,
Mm.
or flip side, to think something's worse than it is because of your own perception. So I think, and that's such a difficult thing to navigate. Like we just none of us know.
Yes. And it's pain is such a complicated one.
Yeah,
Well, I won't say it's complicated. I'd say it's just a little bit, it's more challenging because of how personal the experience is to each person or
yeah,
each horse, each animal.
yeah,
And like you were saying, it can be variable over time too.
yeah,
It can fluctuate depending on, its presence, level of severity, because of those internal and external factors. You know,
yeah,
environment, the activity, how much we're doing, absence of stressors, presence of stressors, because that's all going to
yeah.
be
Stress can
motivating
definitely
factors.
magnify things
Yes, massively.
massively. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's again, like none of this is, as you say, some of it is really obvious and simple, but sometimes it isn't. Like I know for myself, there are things that I really enjoy doing that I get a huge amount of enrichment out of, that my body can find uncomfortable. And that, if I've had a really busy week, and my back's feeling a bit stiff, that can be uncomfortable, like bordering on low level pain. But it's not going to stop me from doing the things that I get a lot of enrichment and enjoyment out of. Like I might pop a couple of ibuprofen and then, head out and do some training with the dog. But and that's the decision that I'm making. And my life would be considerably less enjoyable if I was like, well, my back's a little bit stiff, so therefore I'm not going to do ABC things. And I think there's an element of that also with horses.
Mm.
I know there's definitely that with my dogs. There are things that dogs get a huge amount of enrichment out of that, particularly with my recent experiences. I know Sadie was getting a lot of enjoyment out of things, which I now wonder whether there was some underlying pain issues going on that I didn't know about, but that she was still showing to the outside a huge amount of joy in doing the thing.
Mm.
But I think there's a fine line between management of pain to be able to continue doing something that is emotionally stroke physically beneficial and exploitation.
Yes.
And it's how we decipher where that line is. Like, if you've got an injury, sometimes actually, as we know ourselves, taking some pain relief and then doing some targeted exercise to help build the structures around the area of injury, the site of pain, to build supporting structures is highly beneficial.
Mm.
Like, I'm not saying if there is pain, you must never do anything. But it's like, where is that line between, okay, we're doing this stuff because it is beneficial for you physically and emotionally, even though there is an element of pain going on, but we're hoping to kind of fix that or make it sustainable, versus this is now drifting over into exploitation, like the cost benefit swings the other way.
think you'd be looking at the markers involved and how they improve.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Looking for an improvement.
Yeah, both from a behavioral perspective, but also from a movement perspective, because you aren't going to get one without the other.
No.
In terms of, mind and body, like we always say, don't work in isolation. So the mind is, of course, in many situations going to have a memory of pain,
Yeah.
an association with levels of discomfort within whatever remit that is. But if you are working appropriately with that horse within their remit, there's not escalation, there is improvement. That's what we want to be focusing on. But with the right support, if
Yeah.
it's needed, sort of externally, like, if there's supplementation, if there is a change to support hoof care, body work, the correct training approach. So effectively, you'd be looking for an accumulative effect within what you are doing with your horse. So if you are seeing improvements within movement, muscle tone, dictated and led by behavior, then if you're seeing those improvements within that horse's remit, that would be the focus point. But if you are seeing things digress, just question, how can we change this? Doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean that we're doing something wrong. It just means that actually that horse might need support in a different way. Whether
Yeah.
that is from, influences like we've just mentioned, coming from nutrition, pharmaceutical, a different a different body work, a different training approach, a different management approach, all of the things above. Because when it comes to working with pain, it's not quite often it's multifactorial.
Yeah.
I mean, quite a few horses that I see in terms of whether I'm training or treating them, there's multiple elements going off within that horse's body, which I quite enjoy, but it's not
Mm.
straightforward.
No.
And it's
No.
working with that within our remit as people. And going back to what you said earlier on, Amy, is I think it was a really valid point of how can we, as professionals and owners, support the horses, just learn.
Yeah.
Just learn to recognize what behaviors actually mean,
Yeah.
and to try and enhance our own awareness of what we're looking for. Check in with them.
Yeah.
Check in with their bodies
Yeah.
routinely, not just when we notice there's a problem. So we're not
Yeah.
looking for it, we are just looking for maintenance and to ensure that our horse is comfortable.
Yeah. And I think, like, adjacent to that, I like just slowing down and taking the time. Like, everybody leads busy lives. And there can be a temptation like, right, I've got this 2 hours, I've got to dash to the yard, grab my horse, tack him up, go for a quick hack, get back, rush home, cook dinner. Like, we all know what that's like. But actually, just allowing time to slow down and just watch what's happening for the horse when you're not interacting with it directly. And how does that feel? Like going down the the more woo-woo route of things. When you
More
stop,
observational.
but that's it. But yes, you can observe those things, but you can also feel what's coming off the horse if you allow yourself to. This is quite a new thing to me. It's been a bit of a revelation. Um,
Welcome to the dark side.
but just listening to what the horse's body is telling you physically as well as what you're seeing through your eyes
Mm,
can tell you a huge amount.
yeah.
But you've got to, you just got to slow it down
Mm.
and not be doing everything at warp speed.
Yeah, that's how we miss things.
Yeah, totally.
Hmm.
Totally.
Well, I think that has given people enough to lick and chew on.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. It's tr it's such a it's such a vast topic, isn't it? And like there's this where you draw the line on things, I think is dependent on individual horse, individual circumstances, but it's definitely for me, it's just trying to define what is the line between management and exploitation.
That might be the follow-up.
Yeah, well, maybe,
Mm.
maybe. But there isn't an easy
Right.
answer, I don't think.
No, no, very subjective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, as we've mentioned, if anyone would like to look up some very beneficial resources that would help you learn and increase your observational skills in identifying equine pain, we both would highly recommend you look up Sue Dyson's work on the ridden horse pain ethogram,
Yeah.
Karina Glierup's equine pain face, and Dallacosta's horse grimace scale. So they are all great resources to give everyone a little bit more of an insight, a little bit more awareness of to how to correctly interpret equine behavior within the context that it's happening. So hopefully you guys get a little bit of enjoyment of looking up some of that. And thank you again for tuning in to this week's episode. And we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with the next.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.